Good morning, and you are very welcome to today's CBI webinar. My name is Kerry Thomas. I'm an editor at a news startup called Tortoise, and it's a great pleasure to have your company again today. We're talking about jobs this morning, how to build a job-rich recovery. And if you forgive a slightly pessimistic note at the beginning, when I saw that title, I thought, ouch, that's quite tough, because the consensus among economists is certainly that we are heading into a period of unemployment. The FT was reporting last week its sort of panel of economists predicting perhaps 1 million more unemployed people by Christmas than we have now. We can check with Rain Newson-Smith in a bit whether she thinks that's reasonable or not. And that's in spite of the job support scheme the Chancellor announced last week. So unemployment, youth unemployment particularly, I think is going to be one of the big stories of the next few months. But at least we have a chance this morning to think our way through what business can do to avoid redundancies as much as possible in the short term, and how we can help rebuild, and perhaps critically how government can help business to rebuild in the medium and longer term. So we have with us Rain Newton-Smith, CBI's chief economist. I'll come to you very shortly, Rain. We have Susan Raftery, who's a senior advisor at ACAS. Many of you will know exists to promote and facilitate strong industrial relations. And we have Chris Johnson, who's a senior partner at Mercer, which again, many of you will know is a very large human resources consulting firm. As ever on these calls, I think we do want to hear as many questions, as many observations as we can from you. So please do fire them in. There'll be a questions button somewhere there on your screen, and those will come through to me. If we don't answer those questions on the call today, then the CBI will try and pick up as many of them as it can in the course of the rest of the day. And if you want to put something in anonymously, then please do just write anon at the top of the question or the comment, and we will deal with that confidentially, of course. But let's get going, shall we? Rain, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Kerry.
I thought we might deal with this in the style of a presidential debate, so you can shout clown and interrupt.
Oh, please no.
There is.
Try to aim higher than that, Kerry.
Rain, let me just, the CBI has ongoing and sort of often very productive conversations with government, has been having that right through this crisis. Can you just sort of bring us up to date with the conversations that you've had over the past few days on the government's economic plan, both with the government and perhaps with CBI members, to fill us in on both sides of that picture?
Yeah, look, it's been a pretty frenetic and I think pretty sobering couple of weeks for everyone. I think, we've seen additional restrictions everywhere, trying to help businesses through that. And also, I think we've seen some really important announcements on further economic support, and we've been talking closely to businesses and all parts of government about both feeding into that, but also coming out of that. And I think earlier this week we saw, and they actually come into effect today, further restrictions in the Northeast, for example. That's mainly, really focused around households getting together, but it does have a real implication for business, because now two households can't come together even in a pub or restaurant, even if those places are COVID secure. And I think one of the things that we're continuing to work with government, particularly with BEIS, is around some of the guidance and what, communication as well around local lockdowns. And I think we really need to see three things to our mind. One is about absolutely announcing dates as far ahead as possible. Appreciate that isn't always possible, but I think the more people have time to plan and businesses to prepare, the better. And second, being really clear on the evidence behind decisions. We're getting a lot of inbound calls and concerns, for example, around the 10 p.m. curfew in some areas of the local lockdown, and what that really means for hospitality in particular. We know a lot of pubs take over half of their revenues after 10 p.m., so it has huge implications. And it comes down as well to human behavior. What do people do otherwise? If they aren't in a safe environment in a pub where measures have been taken to protect people's health, where are they going to do some of that socialization? And I think that's a real concern, and something we're in direct conversation with government on. And I think we need to make sure we're making the right decisions for the whole economy around that, and while protecting people's health. I think the other thing, and it's great to see the winter economic plan announced last Thursday, but I think as far as we can, when we do see additional restrictions put in place, trying to get the economic measures announced at the same time so they go in lockstep, I think is really, really important. And maybe, Kerry, helpful if I just go through a little bit around that, the economic plan and sort of where we are now with those conversations with Treasury, because we really need to hear as well from businesses to feed into that. So, great to see that we now have the job support scheme, us, the TUC. We've been really calling for having a successor to the JRS. We knew we needed that to smooth rising unemployment. That is everyone's biggest concern at the moment. It's not going to save every job and every business, and I think this is where actually the policy decisions and the decisions for all of us as businesses this next few months, things get a lot tougher actually. Even if some of the biggest economic hit in theory is behind us, the economy is starting to recover. But I think the Treasury is having to move where they've been spending hundreds of billions of pounds to whatever they announce now. They really only have the space to look at measures that maybe cost in less than 10 billion pounds, for example. So the ordinal amount of money there is to spend is a lot lower, I think. And I think for businesses, really having these important conversations with your employees where you are facing more challenging times and making sure you come to the right decision for your business both now and over the long term is really, is a real challenge. So I think that job support scheme really important. We've heard from manufacturers and aviation and many other businesses and some in retail and hospitality that this has been a huge lifeline. They can really see how this will help them get through the winter months where they see demand being weak, and it will support viable jobs. But we are hearing from some others that they just don't think it goes far enough. So that's something where we really need to get that information back from businesses on both sides. Where is it working? Where is it not working? And really work with government on the design of that. And there's a big set of questions about the guidance. There is a gateway test. So that scheme is only for smaller businesses, you can access it without any gateway test. But for larger businesses, there will be a criteria about looking at your revenue and really showing that your revenue has been impacted by the crisis. And of course, that's appropriate, but we're working on how that would actually work. It's likely to be, say, your revenue in the last quarter has been hit by around 20% compared to the previous year. But the devil in many cases is in the detail. So keen to communicate with businesses on that. I think the other big set of measures that actually probably didn't get as much attention in the press over the last few days has been about the measures to support cash flow. And these are important whichever sector you're in. So, businesses did have the opportunity to defer the Q1 VAT payments. That was going to fall due at the end of March, but now you've got a whole year to repay that. And that's worth about 38 billion across the whole economy to businesses' cash flow. So a huge change. The other big measure is the loan schemes will stay open until the end of November. Really important, right? Because I think we're picking up there is still some serious distress out there in the economy. And the second big set of measures is those loans can be repaid over a much longer period of time. So for the bounce backs, instead of over 6 years, it's now over a decade. That's a lot of time. It means that businesses' monthly repayments, it almost halves their monthly repayments that would have started next year. So I think that's a huge amount of breathing space for a lot of businesses. But where we're in conversations with government is really understanding where the current restrictions are really biting on different types of businesses. Secondly, how we can really support city centres to regenerate. I think with the new guidance about working from home for a longer period of time, that's undoubtedly going to have an impact on some of our city centres. And how do we help those businesses where restrictions are still in place? How do we make sure that they can continue to support jobs as we move through this crisis? So there's a lot of measures out there. We're really having those conversations with Treasury, with HMRC, and they're really keen to keep that two-way flow of communication going through these tough winter months ahead.
Okay. I think I would love to hear from people on the call their initial response to the job support scheme, whether they find it useful, whether there are the elements of it that don't quite work for them in the way that Rain mentioned. Because I think, Rain, one of the interesting things about it is that, and I should probably credit, there's a really good piece in the Financial Times by Sarah O'Connor this morning that goes to this. And it's asking businesses now to decide which jobs are or are not viable. And in a lot of cases, that feels quite early to make that decision when the government is still intervening so heavily in the economy in ways to keep us safe from coronavirus. That may not be an easy decision to make right now, but companies are having to make it.
Yeah, look, it's really tough. And I think when we look across sectors, I think one of the things we can distinguish is, in which sectors are these decisions a lot more challenging. I think if you look to the hit to output, along with which sectors have been using furlough, the ones that really sort of stand out are aviation and parts of transport. People are not moving around the country as much as they used to. Making those decisions right now as to where we'll settle up is really difficult. Definitely in some parts of hospitality, but there's a whole set of areas, I would say, arts, leisure, entertainment, business conferences. You can kind of group them together as live events where you're in person. There are obviously restrictions on the size of those events at the moment. We don't quite know when we're going to be in a position to be able to do those live events. But I do think so that's another big area of the economy. Another area is also around the automotive industry and their supply chain, right? Really have also been impacted. Some of that impact was happening before coronavirus, but it's definitely been a bit more challenging since then. So those are some of the sectors we really have an eye on. And as you say, the real challenge is trying to figure out, will these jobs be viable over the medium term? But I think that's where I would say, though, the job support scheme does mean that employers will be making some contribution to the non-worked hours, but it's still relatively modest, compared to, certainly what would be there if there weren't any support in place. And I think our sense is where you can look at your business and look to the future and you think, yes, I do have a business with an ongoing concern. You may not be able to keep all of your staff. You may need to look at your business, how it's structured. But I think what it does allow you to do is to keep on the majority of your staff. And the intention is to flex their hours. So you're keeping on more people at a smaller working pattern, but you're able to keep people in work. There's the potential, of course, for them to train in their non-working hours. And you're able to support more people as you go through this crisis so that when demand does pick up, you're ready. You're ready for that pickup in growth. You have the people. You can easily start to scale up, increase people's hours back to their normal working patterns and really be ready as growth picks up across the economy.
Okay, I want to come to Chris and Susan very soon, Rain, but we should probably just, before we do that, just touch very quickly on the lifetime skills guarantee scheme that the Prime Minister announced. Just give us a quick rundown on that before I come to Chris and Susan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was one of the bits that people really felt was missing from the winter economic plan, focus on supporting existing jobs. We've seen some support to job creation, but, how do we really help with sort of adult retraining? And so we saw that announcement yesterday. And I think so now any adult who doesn't have an A-level or equivalent qualification will be offered a free, fully funded college course. And I think that is hugely vital. That adult skills is so important and a big opportunity. And that will be funded through the National Skills Fund, available in England from April. And the full list of courses will be out shortly. There'll also be more higher education loans, will be made more flexible for adults and young people so that you can space some of that learning throughout our lives. The challenge is we're all living and working longer, but still most people invest in their education and training at the beginning, before 18 or when they're young adults. This is allowing more flexibility. I mean, I think there's still further to go we'd still like to see the apprenticeship levy, which is one of the main ways in which training is offered and which businesses contribute to that. We'd like to see that you know, a lot more flexible and be more of a training levy, so it captures all kinds of adult training and retraining, and that's something we're absolutely working with government on.
Okay, Ray, don't go away. We'll come back to you. Chris and Susan, thanks for your patience. Let me come to you first, Chris, because we were talking actually just before the call started, and you were pointing me towards what you thought was a big difference between the way that companies responded to the 2008 financial crisis and the way that they're behaving now. Can you just talk us through what you're seeing that you think is different?
Yeah, absolutely. It is fascinating, and a lot of people have been saying if you go back to 2008, 2009 in the financial crisis, it was the finance director that guided the company through all of that. What we're now seeing is the HR director playing a much bigger role, and in many ways guiding the companies through. Why is this? And I think what's happening is that partly stimulated by this government and other governments around the world support for people in the workplace, some of the things that Rain was talking about, companies too have taken a much deeper interest in their people, trying to protect jobs, trying to sustain the business by having still people connected to it. So I think this crisis, in terms of the response to it, is much more of it's a response much more centered around the good handling of people. Now in Mercer, because we're a management consultancy firm, we try and find alliterations to describe this. So we talk about economics. We talk about economics, which is the focus on the business and making the business sustainable through all of this. And we talk about empathy, which is actually focusing on the people side of the business. So we play with these two words, economics and empathy. This crisis has got a lot more empathy in it, a lot more people-centered focus than did the last one. So what we're seeing, for example, is many companies restructuring. It's companies in the face of threats, some of the sectors that Rain described as being under stress, inevitably having to restructure. But we're also seeing companies who are having a good pandemic, they happen to have products and services that are in demand now, also restructuring. So they're thinking about how do they reshape their business to fit with the new market circumstances. And we're also seeing many companies who suspended restructuring activity at the beginning of the pandemic coming back and saying, no, we've actually got to restructure the business. Our dilemma is, how do we restructure the business on the one hand, and on the other hand, really support our people as much as we possibly can through all of this. And that the level of support that we're seeing for the workforce is much higher in this crisis than it was in the last one. We can talk about some of the ways that's done, but I think just in terms of the big headline, is it's a much more people-centered solution to the crisis than it has been from governments as well as from companies.
All right, but does that in the end, do you think, mean that, because the economics are pretty tough here, does that mean that I just end up being made redundant nicely? Or does it mean that I'm not?
I think it means a couple of things. I think it does mean that redundancy is going to happen, and I think it has to be handled really well. And so there's a lot more attention to that, and I'm sure Susan has got a lot to say about that from the ACAS perspective. It also means that companies are thinking about how can we help our people be more adaptable. So as we restructure, they can take up the jobs that emerge from restructuring. We're seeing a lot of companies focused on reskilling. So it's interesting, we talk about the Lifetime Skills Program. I mean, that sits with a general theme about how do we help people develop the skills for the jobs that are going to emerge from all of this. And it's really tough because it's how you help people in one job today and their skill set see the potential to develop a slightly different set of skills for a job that's going to be there in the future. That's a tough thing to deal with. And sometimes the jobs are going to be in different places. So the whole thing about location and where I live is going to be challenged too. But a strong reskilling agenda alongside a handling redundancies really well agenda seems to me right at the heart of how we help people through all of this.
Okay. Susan, can I come to you? I mentioned at the beginning, you're from ACAS. Great to have you with us because ACAS always at the sort of sharp end of moments like this. Can I just first ask you to tell us what's happened to your workload, what trends you're seeing, whether you agree with Chris that it feels different this time than it did 10, 12 years ago?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think Chris is right. Things do feel different this time. So far as we're concerned, I know our helpline, for example, June and July, I think we had 160% increase on calls around redundancy compared to the same time last year from employers and employees, and hits to our website. Sadly, we're starting to see an increase in employment tribunal claims as well. Not all around redundancy, but quite significant amounts around redundancy. And what we're finding is this time round, a lot of it is the SMEs. So less so about the larger organisations who've been around for a long time, because sadly they may have been through it before, but the smaller organisations really don't know what to do, and it's trying to sort of help them work their way through. I do agree with Chris. What we're finding, certainly anecdotally, because we talk to trade unions as well, is that they're saying they're actually finding there are better relationships with employers. There's more openness this time round. Whereas last time, I think I agree, I think in sort of 2008, it was very much, these are the redundancies we're making, end of story. Whereas now there's much more of a collegiate, let's sit down and talk about this. Are there different things we can do? We're having a lot of questions around what changes can we make to people's contracts with consultation. So are there things we can do rather than the simply knee-jerk, let's slash and burn and get rid of a whole group of people? So I think there does feel there's a different feeling around it, and much more around let's try and involve people, which we would always encourage. I think it was interesting you said about, is this not just redundancy done nicely? I think there's more to it. It's more around ensuring that, well, who can we keep? And also, even if we have to let people go, we've got to try and keep our workforce going forward, engaged, happy, productive, all the good stuff, because those are the people who are going to bring us out of this crisis. And as Chris mentioned, the restructuring, the reskilling. I think a lot of employers have better relationships with their employees at the moment than they've had in the past, because they are talking about it and because it is something that they're all trying to work towards the same goal. What we're trying to encourage is that isn't lost, that going forward we don't lose all that goodwill that we've got at the moment.
This feels like quite interesting and quite a big change in 10 or 12 years. Susan, do you know what lies behind it? Why have things shifted so much?
I think the difference this time is that, as I say, in the 2008 crisis, there was a lot of feeling, whether rightly or wrongly, that someone was to blame. And you can take views on that. Whereas this time round, certainly when we were speaking to employers and employees at the start, everyone understood this was nobody's fault. I was speaking to employers who said before furlough came in, their employees were saying they will agree to not being paid until it's sorted out, which you would never have had in the past. Employees agreeing to changes to their hours, employers being prepared to open their books, which again you would never have in the past, and say, look, this really is legitimate. We really have lost this amount of money. So I think that's the difference. That it doesn't feel as so much of a them and us as there was previously.
Yeah.
I totally echo that. If I could just come in and carry on that, I totally echo that. And I think that sense of transparency about the position of the company, it's a shared problem. We both face this. Neither of us made this problem. It's a problem that's come to us. I think has really changed the tone of the debate within companies very, very significantly.
Good. And Susan, if you mentioned that a large number of the people coming to you are SMEs who maybe don't have the sort of systems and processes that bigger companies have in order to dealt with this stuff more regularly in the past. What kind of advice can you give to an SME that comes to you in that way?
It very much depends. The first thing we always say, and again I say this, I think I'm going to have this on my gravestone, is talk to the staff. Don't simply react immediately. And I think that's something that can be quite difficult for employers. I think we were talking before we came on air about the fact that line managers, you may have fantastic line managers, but actually, are they used to communicating bad news? Bear in mind, they might feel quite responsible for it as well, so they need the support. HR are great at this sort of thing, but line managers less so. So it's making sure the line managers are equipped and have the right skills, talking to the staff and talking around other options that are available, and not forgetting that if they do have to make people redundant, there are processes to go through. Again, what we've found is that some people on sometimes employers who have large amounts of staff on furlough don't think they have to follow any processes, and that's simply a lack of awareness and a lack of knowledge. So we're talking a lot to them about making sure they still consult with their staff, they communicate with their staff, even if their staff are at home or on furlough, pick up the phone to them. A lot of discussions around video calls and emails. Well, actually, an old-fashioned phone call is sometimes the best way to do it.
Yeah.
So very much the old-fashioned type of communication advice still holds good today.
Yeah, Chris, we've had a question asking, particularly you, how much creativity you're seeing from employers thinking their way through these sort of big issues that they're facing. Can you think of any sort of creative solutions?
Yeah, I can think of a few, and employers are trying to do things differently. Whether they are being creative, I'm not sure about the word, but they're definitely trying to do things differently. So if I could just build on the point that Susan was making, and then make another one. Employers are really, certainly the large employers, and here I think the point about SMEs and large employers, that distinction is an interesting one. Large employers are going to an awful lot of effort to try and understand what's on their people's minds, so that when they talk with their people, they're talking about what matters to them, and they're thinking about how best to support their people. Our research has highlighted a couple of things. One is how important the supervisor and the immediate team is for everybody. So I feel who do I feel most supported by? My immediate line manager, my team. Why is that? Because my line manager calls me. Back to your point, Susan, about the telephone call, the Zoom call. We do social things on Zoom as a team. And then the second thing is, and the visibility of the CEO. So messages coming from the top in a very visible and very reassuring way, complemented by the local manager, who needs to be well supported. Back to Susan's point, they do need help to do this well, but the local manager is a key piece. So creativity in terms of understanding what's on employees' minds and trying to use those mechanisms to engage with employees. A second one, and it's an alternative to redundancy. A number of the large employers are trying to work through, is there some way in which, if we've got people we don't need in our business, we can collaborate with another business who may need these skills? So it's almost like creating a job market between employers, so that even if we can't employ this person, we're helping someone else and the individual, because we can help them be employed in a different place. That happened in the face of the early days of the pandemic. There are some amazing examples, particularly one in Germany involving McDonald's and Aldi, but there's growing examples of employers thinking about this as a long-term way of dealing with the fact that their need for talent, their need for the workforce is going to flex, but rather than making people redundant, can we help people to find appropriate work in other organizations? So collaboration between companies is becoming, I think, a really interesting, very, very interesting development.
Yeah, Rain, that's such an interesting set of points there about the very different way that companies are approaching these big questions this time around. What Chris just made about collaboration between companies to try to preserve jobs or keep people in employment, even if the employment isn't within the company where they've perhaps been before. Given that we're seeing that sort of organically from companies, what role do you think then additionally there might be for regional government, for LEPs, for national government? What else might employers look to in terms of facilitation or help from those tiers of government?
Yeah, well, so maybe I'll say a little bit about the support from business, and then on to government. I mean, I think really to echo what Susan and Chris have said, I think throughout this crisis, there's been a real spirit of we're all in this together, and there are some really tough choices out there, but how can we talk to our staff? How can we look at the realities we're facing and get through this together? And I think we've put out a statement with ACAS and with the TUC, which goes through some guidance around how to have some of these conversations with your employees. How can you get those conversations right? Because I think what we do know is, that those who are able to retain their employees, and those who are able to look at some of the redundancies they may have to make, but do them well, will absolutely be rewarded by employees feeling more engaged in their workplace, and that sort of, you treat people well through a crisis, and they will certainly reward you with that loyalty as you emerge. So I think that's so important. And I think the other thing I'd really pick up on was what Susan was saying, is part of the design of the job retention scheme was to absolutely make sure that people's employment rights were preserved when you were on furlough and when you come off. So I think, knowing that people have those rights throughout that process, really, really important. And I think actually, in some ways, what the job support scheme is trying to do is to open up options, give a range of options to employers and employees about what they can do. And some of it may be looking at your business and saying, actually, if you're a smaller business, is talking to employees about whether they'd like to change their working pattern to ensure that more of them can work a smaller set of hours, and maybe you renegotiate on that. Or you can look at the job support scheme to really help give a contribution from government to those non-working hours. So I think it does open up the range of options that people absolutely do have. And I think the final thing I'd say before coming on to the support from government is, I think from our latest employment trend survey, we can see that employers are absolutely doing this, and particularly around pay. I think the ideal, in a way, it's tough for all of us, is to take some of those negotiations on pay and hours, but to try and protect jobs, the actual number of people you're employing. And we're definitely seeing companies do that. We know from our survey that a third are looking at pay freezes across all roles, and that gives them more money to plow that into protecting jobs. And I think you're seeing lots of businesses talk to their employees. You have to do that through discussion with your employees, but many people are thinking that that's a sensible sacrifice. And absolutely, there's work to be done talking through LEPs and looking at that. And there's a few examples of that. The Kickstarter scheme, so that's a scheme where you can, the government will pay the first 6 months when you take on a young person who's been out of work for 6 months. I think it's a great scheme. For smaller businesses to access their scheme, they need to group themselves together. A LEP can play a real role in helping smaller businesses get together, say, actually, together we can support 30 placements under that Kickstarter scheme. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And of course, LEPs can look at, where jobs are being created, and this whole business about looking, we'd love job centres to be rethought, redesigned, almost rebranded, and get rid of some of the stigma and make them places where you can go digitally, actually, and think about what jobs are out there, what retraining can I get under the National Skills Fund, and really make it a partnership between, employees, people who are looking for work, and make it feel much more collaborative, modern, and innovative.
Yeah, actually, I've just had a message, Rain, about a thing called the Talent Retention Scheme, which does exactly the kind of thing that Chris is suggesting. I think it's focused on the sort of engineering and technology sectors, but it is but you can Google it and find details, but it is a way for employers to try to keep skilled people within the system, as it were. So that's that might be something worth looking at. Susan, can I come to you? Because one of the other features, I suppose, of now that feels different from 10 or 12 years ago is much more of a conversation about mental health as part of these considerations. Is that something that you're hearing more about compared to the past as well?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think mental health has fortunately started to come up the agenda for a lot of organisations, and we were seeing this even before the pandemic. But again, I think employers are much more aware of it. We're certainly being approached a lot more about it. How do we support the people who are in the workplace? How do we support the people who are working from home? And as we know, although there are people still in the workplace, there are quite a chunk of us who are still at home. And whereas initially we thought this might be a relatively short period of time, as time's gone on, I think employers are now starting to think we need to focus on our staff's well-being, we need to focus on their mental health. I know there's some quite frightening statistics out there about the impact it's having on people's mental health. So employers are becoming, again, much more aware of it, and starting to appreciate that actually this is going to have an impact. So we want staff who are as well as they can be. And again, having that conversation, I think it's coming back to something that Chris said earlier, that there's been a concern about not talking about mental health. People find it difficult to talk about redundancy. They find it even harder to talk about mental health. So again, it's having people in workplaces who are comfortable doing it and trying to get rid of that stigma is incredibly important. And again, we are seeing a lot more employers who are approaching us saying, what can we do? How can we help our staff? How can we help with their well-being? How can we help with their resilience during this time, which I don't think 10 years ago employers were talking about resilience to any of their staff.
Yeah, and Chris, I suppose it really just supports your point that balance between the economy and empathy, that it's so important to do things in the right way, even if they're difficult things to do.
Exactly, and I just want to echo Susan's point. We are seeing, I think all of our employers, I can't think of a single employer that's not doing this, really thinking very seriously about the well-being of their people. Well-being is probably the word that's quite often used, but then actually being very open about this is a situation where people are going to be stressed. You know, just think about it. You work, for those people who are working at home, they may be on Zoom for 8 hours a day. I mean, if the employers are trying to step in and saying that's not the right way to be working at home, and it's really important to be you've got responsibilities for family, maybe children, maybe older people. It's absolutely okay to look after them. Don't feel stressed about trying to do that on the one hand and on the other hand trying to do your job. Lots of support to line managers about when you are with teams on Zoom, then just spend a bit of time talking about how people are. Don't just focus on the business, focus on the individuals who are there. Encourage people to take a break, encourage people to go for a walk. So there's a huge amount of tension being pushed down line management structures around helping people deal with the stress of all of this. And employers are also looking at their employee assistance programs, asking, are these the programs now up to the challenge of today, and adjusting them if they're not. Employers are looking at their benefits programs and asking whether all the healthcare benefits are really supporting the situation that employees are facing. Right at the heart of that is a recognition that this is a stressful situation, and as a consequence, mental health issues absolutely are openly discussed and coming much more to the fore of employers' concerns.
Yeah, and Chris, I've talked to Rain a little bit about whether the government has introduced so far are likely to be sufficient, or I think Rain's indicated that some of them may need to be revisited. What are you hearing from the companies that you're dealing with about, for example, whether the JSS feels like it's going to be well taken up or doesn't quite hit the mark? What are you hearing about the range of measures that we've heard so far?
Bear in mind, we tend to deal with large employers, and I do think the situation for the small, medium employers and large employers, the situations are different. So we've actually had quite a lot of our clients saying we're not taking up the schemes. We actually are going to mimic the schemes. We're going to support our people, but we will do this out of our own resources rather than to take up the schemes. And some employers we know in the public domain have actually handed money back, initially taken it and then handed it back. I think what is interesting is not so much the take-up of the schemes, but the recognition by companies that the government is really trying to play a very supportive hand here. We may criticise the specifics of schemes, but it is quite remarkable how much effort the government has gone to try and support people in the labour market. And that is recognised by employers and is taken as a signal. So even the large employers are seeing it. They may not be taking up the programmes, but they're seeing a signal from government, and I think they're responding really well to that signal. So I take my hat off to what the government is trying to do. I think it is quite remarkable, and it's having a big impact, even amongst those employers that are not choosing to take up the schemes.
Yeah. Rain, we've had a question in which is slightly tangential to the main things we're talking about, but it's important, so let me put it to you anyway. It's about work enablers, and this person says an important element of the future of work is also affordable childcare provision to enable employees to agree who agree to reduced hours and pay. Without this, families may have difficult decisions, for example, about which partner steps off the career ladder. A conversation still going on with the government and employers about childcare provision and those kind of support measures.
Absolutely. I think something we really have in our sights. We've had it throughout the crisis, but it will definitely continue in the months ahead. Is looking at the enablers across the economy, childcare, education, transport, and I think it's so vital. And look, I guess to build on what Chris said, if I can say something where I think the government has got it absolutely right in the last few weeks, is prioritising keeping schools open and even keeping young people in universities, though it brings with it a whole host of challenges, and maybe I say that with some passion, since my 4 kids would otherwise be in the room next to me trying to do homeschooling online, which is just so difficult, and we know has huge challenges around social mobility in the future. So keeping those schools open, absolutely vital. But the area we still have a lot of concerns is around childcare provision, and there's a worry that some of the nursery and wraparound childcare providers, particularly in city centres, are finding things really tough at the moment, right? If they used to have people who would bring their kids in when they went into their place of work, and they're now finding those people aren't commuting. It's nursery places have always been really hard to find in lots of different areas in around the UK, and we also know that the costs of childcare, early years childcare in the UK, is a lot higher than it is in other countries. So I think making sure we have enough providers that childcare is affordable is so important, and we've really got to make sure that we keep that critical capacity. And the same is equally true on transport. We're in this period where not many, people are traveling a lot less than they would do normally when we're in a world post-virus. But we've got to make sure we keep our transport providers so that when we're back in a period where we are moving around the country more, we've got that critical infrastructure provision. So it's something we absolutely have our eye on, and really keen as well to get, the more we get examples of where this is impacting your business, whether you're a nursery or childcare provider, or whether you're a business who employees rely on that to be able to be in their place of work. All of that is really powerful in our messages and conversations with government.
Okay, listen, Ray, Chris, Susan, we've gone a little bit over time, but we've enjoyed ourselves. So I think that's fine. Thank you so much for your help. It's been a really interesting conversation. I feel actually more encouraged at the end than I did at the beginning, this sense that employers are behaving as if, and employees, this feeling that we are all in this together.